Hello. I can't hear anybody. Hold on. I cannot hear anybody.
Can you hear me?
I got, there you go.
Okay. Hi, Kathy.
Kathy.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I will mute myself again. It's kind of noisy where I am.
Okay. Hey, Marnie.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Marnie.
Hi, Kathy.
You got my resume? You got my resume?
I did not.
Oh, well, check. I sent it earlier today.
Okay, I will certainly check.
Sure, I have the. The camera was there. Oops, shoot. Did I just lose it?
Hello, gentlemen.
Okay. Let's see. Got Seth and Kent together. Hey guys. And we're,
Hello, everybody. We'll stay muted until stuff gets organized, but great to see everybody.
yep, good seeing you. And let's see. So Carol and Jordan were missing. Anybody, they call and say they're coming or are able to? Or is Kay Carol? No, Catherine Wallace. Okay, sorry, Catherine. So Marnie, you didn't hear from Carol or Jordan?
I didn't. I'm going to reach out to them both right now and see if I get a response.
Okay.
Eric, how were the performances going? The lectures you were working on?
They were, so we had the first one, which was great with Secretary Leanne Panetta, which was great to give kind of a global view of land use and how it affects national security and things like that. And of course it did jumped into a little politics, as maybe inevitable with dealing with a politician, but
Yes.
It was good. I think everyone got a lot out of it. And then the second one we just had last Thursday, which was great. It was, we had Tony Lombardo as the, understanding kind of land use law and property rights. And then we had Mike Lapata, is that his name? Who's head of Monterey County Land Watch, who was also interesting. And it's interesting how those two, how much they agreed actually on things. And we had, is it Jeanette? I forget her last name, who's head of Big Sur Land Trust. It's part of the conservation. We had a name familiar to some of us, Matthew Sunt, as a representative planner to it. And it was a great panel discussion, a lot of good questions. I think
Good.
it would have been, yeah. We're going to put it online, so I hope, especially like city staff and things can enjoy watching that.
That would be great.
So I just got a message from Jordan. He's not going to be able to join us this afternoon. I'm still waiting to hear back from Carol.
Okay. Should we start then? And we have a quorum, I guess, with 3 of us. Okay.
Yep.
So let me go to the agenda here. So I'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea Historic Resources Board to order from Monday, May 16th. Roll call, please.
Board Member Gualtieri,
Here.
Board Member Hall, Board Member Pomeroy,
I'm here.
and Chair Dyer.
Here. Okay. And we did not have a tour inspection, but at this point, if anyone is attending this Zoom that would like to address the board on issues that are not on the agenda today, you may do so. I don't see anybody here except, see Mary's with us, but okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the announcements. Is there any announcements? I suppose it's at this point I could announce the third and final AIA Monterey Bay Arts and Architecture Lecture Series, which will happen on May 26th, Thursday, again at Hidden Valley Music Seminars, 6 p.m. And it's going to feature Bernard Traynor of Ground Studio, one of the preeminent landscape architects in California and a Carmel resident. And we'll talk about land use in terms of building, in the open landscape and addressing, man-made elements within, pristine landscapes. So it should be in that interface. So that should be a interesting one. So I'd recommend going to see that. And again, it will be videoed and we'll put it on our AIA Arts and Architecture website. Okay, moving on to consent agenda, unless anyone else has any announcements. Okay, consent agenda, and it's the adoption of the minutes, April 18th, 2022. Was everyone here for that meeting? That's Kathy and Catherine.
I think so.
Thank you.
I move approval.
Okay. Do we have a second, Kathy, or I can second it?
I wasn't there.
Oh, you weren't there. Okay. Ooh, okay. So I guess we don't have a quorum for that then, for the adoption of the minutes. Should we put that off to the next meeting?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now for our one and only order of business for today, which is an historic context statement public workshop. Marnie, would you like to introduce it? And then I guess we'll go to Seth and Ken.
Yes, and good afternoon. So give me just 1 second here while I share my screen. Okay. How does that look?
Looks good to me.
Good.
Great. Okay. Well, this afternoon we are having our kickoff meeting for the historic context statement update. And this will be the first of 4 public meetings that will take place on this project. In an effort to encourage participation in the update process, staff is using a variety of outreach tools, including posting additional legal notices in the Carmel Pine Cone, including announcements in the city administrator's Friday letter. And then also we'll be using constant contact to provide updates and solicit feedback from the community. We've also created a dedicated webpage on our website where all documents, notices, announcements and working drafts will be posted. And this update will lay the foundation for evaluating the historical significance of properties constructed between 1966 and 1986. And we encourage and welcome the public's input. So as many of you know, the first historic context statement was adopted back in 1997. It was updated 11 years later in 2008 to include the 1940 to 1965 timeframe. The current effort will cover the time period of 1966 to 1986. So this update is being funded through a grant from the state of California's Office of Historic Preservation, and the city has contracted with past consultants to prepare the update. The principal of past consultants is Seth Bergstein, who has extensive local knowledge and meets the professional qualifications for both historian and architectural historian. Also, Mr. Kent Seavey, a professional historian, will be assisting with the update as a sub-consultant to past. The Historic Context Statement Subcommittee, which includes Chair Eric Dyer and also board member Catherine Galtieri, will also contribute their local and professional expertise to the project. So the project timeline includes this afternoon's kickoff meeting, and this is the first opportunity for the public and the board to provide input on what should be covered in this update. Again, focusing on the 20-year time frame of 1966 to 1986. We're looking for information on significant people, events, development, economic trends, and anything relevant to the time period. Another public workshop will be held on June 20th. That's our next regular Historic Resources Board meeting, and will include the results of our initial research. We will again seek feedback from the public and the board before proceeding with a working draft of the update. At the regular meeting in July, on July 18th, staff will present a working draft and again solicit feedback from the board and the public. We'll then return in August for the board's approval on the final draft. So in order to meet our grant funding deadlines, we do need to meet each of these milestones set forth in the project timeline. So following the board's approval, the document will be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and then it will be presented to the City Council for adoption. And along the way, the recommendations of the board as well as the Planning Commission will be presented to the reviewing bodies. Once the document is adopted by the City Council, it will be submitted to the Coastal Commission for certification and will become part of our local coastal plan. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Associate Planner Catherine Wallace, and she's going to talk about the current context statement as well as the scope of the 20-year update. Catherine?
Thanks, Marnie. So as board members, I know you all work with the historic context statement very regularly, but for any members of the community who might be less familiar with the document, I'll just be providing a very brief overview before handing it over to past consultants. So as Marnie mentioned, the historic context statement is part of the city's preservation program. It's a necessary document because significance of the historic property can really only be judged when evaluated within its historic context. As the National Park Service defines, historic contexts are patterns or trends in history by which a specific occurrence, property, or site is understood and its meaning and significance within history is made clear. Next slide. So the structure and the utility of a historic context statement is pretty straightforward. It's a written document that places built resources, most often buildings, within their appropriate historic, social, and architectural context. The document highlights trends and patterns that shape the built environment, and it describes different property types. It's used as a framework to understand and evaluate the historic or the potentially historic significance of resources and what level of integrity is needed to define them as historic. So if anyone's unfamiliar with the term, integrity in this context is the ability of a property to convey its historicity through retention of its original location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. Next slide. The city is required to maintain and update its historic context statement. This is specified in the general plan and the municipal code. And something to keep in mind about Carmel's historic context statement is that it's just a baseline of information. It's not a history book. And while we try and be comprehensive, we don't include every single style or biographies on every architect. So just because something or someone isn't included in the document, that doesn't preclude a possible finding of historical significance. Next slide. So just as a reminder, there are 5 big themes currently covered in Carmel's historic context statement. These themes do overlap chronologically, and they're divided into sub-themes, which I'll show in the next few slides. And past consultants will be keeping these existing themes and sub-themes, and they'll be adding relevant context from the 1966 to the 1986 period. And when appropriate, they'll add new sub-themes as needed. And each theme also has associated property types that link the themes to the built environment. And they can be based either on function or architectural style or both. Next slide. So here you'll see the 3 sub-themes for the prehistory and Hispanic settlement theme. An example of an associated property type for this theme would be the mission. Next slide. I won't read every one, but you can see here are themes of economic development and government, civic, and social institutions, each with sub-themes. And next slide will show our final themes of architectural development, that's the big one, and development of arts and culture. So we expect these themes to be bulked up under the update effort. Next slide. So as I mentioned, past consultants will largely be working within the existing outline of the document, and they'll be expanding on the existing and adding on where necessary. So just for an example, with the economic development theme, business and tourism sub-theme as an example, they'll be looking at that 66 to 86 period, and they'll be writing about the increased overnight and day trippers. They'll be talking about rising commercial rents, a boom in art galleries, parking and traffic, that sorts of things. And they'll be identifying local architectural examples such as the Lobos Lodge and the Nielsen Market. The Lobos Lodge, 6 cottages were demolished and rebuilt in the Third Bay region style. This you can see in that middle photo. Next slide. So this is a map that our consultants will be using. This gives you a sense of how many properties were developed within that 66 to 86 period. All those blue colored parcels were developed in the period, and the gradients of blue simply specify the decade, 60s, 70s, or 80s. So you can see there's hundreds of properties developed throughout the village during this era, and the updated context statement will be delving into the details of what styles were most predominant or which architects were particularly prolific or notable. And Seth and Kent will, I'll hand it over to them and they can introduce themselves and give you a bit more detail about their approach to the project.
Thank you, everybody. Seth Bergstein here, principal and owner of Past Consultants with Ken Seavey, our architectural historian with over 40 odd years experience on the peninsula and around here. I like to think of context statements in 3 major bullet points, which are essentially what the National Register requirements teach us, which is theme, place, and time. So obviously our scope here is our time period just been given, 1966 to 86. Given the scope of work and the very, very short timeline in this project, we will be adding on to those time periods within the themes that are appropriate. We are not tasked with rewriting any of the current structure of the document. I think largely what this document does not have is how you relate the built environment toward the historic themes that exist right now. We list associated property types. We don't have any connection of the property types to the historical development of Carmel. And while that's a broader issue to address, we're going to try to, as we focus as part of our scope on the mid-century historic property types up till 1986, we will lay in that architectural development chapter a methodology for evaluating historic integrity as a good base for how you could also use this historic integrity evaluative framework for other time periods. Remember, we're not tasked with addressing other time periods right now as far as how we relate architectural development to the historical development. What the current document is, and it's funny, Marty had mentioned that earlier in her presentation, is that it's not a history book. Right now, it kind of is a history book. It's not relating the built environment to the history. And that is really where we would like to see it improve. And what we'll do in this modern, in this chapter that addresses modernism is to break all that down and offer some kind of an approach that a planner or even somebody who owns a home in Carmel can say, oh, I have a home built in this time period. I wonder if it's historic. And what you would do is you would know your time period. You would have lists of what aspects of a building's design, whether it's materials, whether it's architectural design, whether it's significant architect, and or otherwise known as character defining features, what those aspects are and whether they're present or not. You want to try to make these documents as clean and simple as possible. So essentially, both the public and ourselves as professionals are on the same page when we're evaluating buildings. So the CLG requirement for this grant, which is very common with certified local governments in California, is there are times within a certain time period you have to update your documents, and our primary role in this case is the document update. What we would like to do as a secondary scope is get this evaluative approach in there, and in this case, it would be tacking it on to the architectural development chapter. And then if that model proves useful, which we believe it will, we can then expand that model out to the other time periods. But we do want to be clear that with our relatively short time period here to deliver the product, that we're going to deliver the exact product as requested, which is the update from 66 to 86. Up till now, we have reviewed all the previous work that was done by others in 2018. I think the two of us are of the conclusion that trying to work off that previous work is going to probably waste more time than it's going to benefit us. So we're going to develop our outlines, and then we will be relaying them to the subcommittee and having their input, of course. And then as we go through our public meetings and we start producing the document itself, we'll, of course, have everybody's input. But I think what the single biggest thing Marty mentioned, and also Catherine mentioned, is the integrity aspect of the historic context statement is not in the document right now. And which really is, as we all know, half of historic significance. You establish your historic context, but if the building does not have historic integrity, it's not historic. And I think that occurs throughout California, where I work with commissions, in understanding historic integrity component of any argument when we go in front of boards and we discuss development on projects, and we discuss saving buildings, or we discuss how to preserve buildings. So I just wanted to outline our scope on that. And then what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Kent and just give you an idea of some of the outline stuff we've come up with so far and how we're going to integrate it into the present document.
Good afternoon. Basically, what we did was look at the base document that was written back in the day, the business of prehistory, history, the economic development, and the like. Much of it is a done deal, but probably half of it is ongoing. And so we're going to continue that ongoing presence with a timeline that goes up to, I think, 65. We're going to continue that to the 1980s, but with a little more finesse and try to tie that timeline into those specific actions that have taken place within the general area of economic development, government, civic, and the like, as it would apply to the built environment. And then utilizing that, we have association, and that falls into your categories of cultural, primarily cultural arts and the like, and work with that in that way. We're staying within the environment itself, within the city limits, trying like heck to do that. There may be one or two instances within defining a particular type of architecture or style of architecture that something outside of that would be much more understandable to the lay person. Architecture becomes individual at a certain point in the mid to late 20th century. The business of organic architecture per se, it goes in a lot of directions. And we've had some major architects here, but we've also had some local architects here of considerable note that have left quite a legacy. We understand also that there is an issue afoot that's always been afoot in the community. And I would say was and is there still a general consensus of the effort to maintain, quotes, Carmel as the village in the forest. Modern architecture starts here in the 20s. There's a wonderful lecture by Richard Neutra that talks about something that I've always talked about, and that's called continuity and change. Does the punishment fit the crime, or does the building fit the environment? And the environment in Carmel-by-the-Sea is got a lot to do with the design of buildings. So, and the environment is the language at the end of the historic resource and its environment. There are parks, there are landscape features and the like that are unique to Carmel. So we'll be looking at those as well.
And then one thing I'd also like to add to that is, and one thing we reviewed the board minutes, and of course the board, the various bullet points Catherine's provided from the meetings with the previous consultant on the project. And I think that the stress on the mid-century development from both Bay Area architects and regional architects to local architects, or what Eric likes to refer to as one-off architects, is an area that is where a lot of good work can be done, and where we want to I wouldn't say focus, but want to relate the built environment to what we've developed within the document itself. And there are this notion of mid-century not existing in Carmel, or mid-century not being as significant, comes up a lot in historic context statements. And I think the understanding of mid-century and later developments has been a learning curve for a lot of the public, and also a lot of the leadership, simply because it is new and it is more difficult to categorize. So I think that approach is critical to the architectural development chapter, to flesh out that story more. So with that, and updating the 20-year periods within the document framework itself is essentially our scope of work. And I guess what I'd like to offer to the public and to the board as well is, particularly if folks have taken a look at or worked with the document, what would that document look like to you as a person, whether you own a home or whether you work for, you're a contractor, or whether you're a designer or a city employee? What would that successful document look like based on what we already have?
That's a question, I guess, for us, Seth.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and mute everybody. Thank you.
My response to that, and we kind of talked about it before, is I think, and this sort of goes back to what you were asking for, is that hoping to address a kind of second scope of work after this grant period is done and you actually get the update through the 1986, from 1966 to 1986, but to really go back and tie things together, having one document that has some continuity from beginning to end, I think is really, really important. And that consistency the document in terms of format and organization from, when Comstock was doing Storybook to when George Brookhofflow was building the Eastwood building. I think it's important to understand it in the similar way. I think if you don't do that, then I think it gets confusing for people to understand how to view that consistency throughout time. Does that make sense at all? It's just so I know that's part of the second part of the scope. But I guess one good question for you is when you're doing this work through September, does that begin to take the organizational format that you would like to see the rest of the historic context statement take, so that when you get this done, you can go back and start reformatting if we get another grant, for example, which hopefully we would, and be able to finance that, go back and then reorganize the rest of the context statement within that same organizational principles as you're doing the present work?
Well, I think yeah, exactly. That's the ultimate goal. The scope and the time frame right now is so narrow that we need to satisfy the CLG grant. We need to satisfy the deadlines. And so to answer your question, what we'd like to offer in this architectural development chapter is to take this 1930s to this time period you just described from Comstock to Cothlow. And if you review more modern context statements, you see within all these architectural development chapters, key things that are missing from our document. Number one, what are the character defining features visually? For whatever building style you're dealing with, whether it's Storybook, whether it's Spanish Revival, whether it's arts and crafts, whether it's any of these mid-century variants, what are our character defining features? And nothing beats a good photograph of a typical building and a list of these features broken down with bullet points. That is missing altogether from the context statement right now. And then what you'll also see, and there is frankly a really good example, and we've discussed this already in our preliminary meetings, is the Pacific Grove context statement, because you'll see that the themes are very, very specific. They're linked to actual specific time periods of development, and then the built environment is linked to the themes. It's theme, place, and time. It's a three-part, really easy way to remember this, and this is right out of the National Register historic how to develop historic context bulletin. I think it's 22. I forget the number, but so we have themes broadly established now, and we can have a discussion about whether that needs to change or not. But what we really don't have is how do you relate the built environment to the historical development of your given location? And it's not in the document. What we'd like to do as we develop the architectural treatise from this time period is at least offer that within that chapter. So there's going to be photographs of these building styles, a list of character defining features, and then charts commonly known as eligibility requirements and integrity thresholds. And I think in a lot of the modern context statements, there's a lot of repeat in these integrity threshold sort of work charts. You don't really need them for every time period so much as you need the approach understood by whoever's evaluating the building. And again, whether it's a homeowner who looks at a building and goes, I don't know, I want to buy this. Is it going to be historic? We would like to see it be that useful. It's not in its present form.
Can you give an example of an integrity threshold?
Integrity threshold. Well,
defining that in a clear way.
Okay. Typical bullet points would be: does the building retain its original form and roof line? Does it have its original pattern in doors, windows and doors? Does it have its original fenestration pattern? Does it have its original exterior cladding? Okay, so it's relating the presence or absence of the historic fabric that dates to your period of significance, and your period of significance is what illustrates your theme.
Authenticity.
Exactly. So when you have let's just pick a Comstock Storybook building, and let's say it has 3 additions on it. And one's in the front, and it's basically modified the original. Say there's a dormer in the front, it's been removed, and it's modified. The entrance got relocated to accommodate this new addition. If you have 4 or 5 or 6 bullet points that ask these questions, What those bullet points are doing is breaking down the 7 aspects, well, more like 5 of the 7 aspects of historic integrity into a manner in which we all can fairly evaluate a given building. You know, like for instance, I have a call to go look at somebody from a client for you guys for the city who wants to list the building. You know, so it was built. I won't say who it is, but it's built in X time period, right? So ideally, I would go to the historic. I mean, of course, going to evaluate it myself using using federal, state, and local guidelines and integrity guidelines anyway. But then we want the historic context statement to take those 3 groups of requirements, federal, state, and local, and break it down, break the historic integrity of these various styles into basically yes and no questions, right? So if you don't have the form and roof line, if you don't have the original fenestration pattern, right, you don't have, say, all the chimneys are removed, you don't have these kinds of features, then you can safely say it doesn't have historic integrity, the building's not historic. So you could arguably streamline the review process as well. I mean, that's way down the road. But that's where I think historic context statements have developed so much in the last 20 odd years since we first did this for the city of Carmel, the other consultants. I'm a little surprised in 08 this wasn't addressed, because by then, I mean, I was at ARG until 04. We were already doing these kinds of charts and things. So I don't really quite get why that wasn't done, but you never know previous work what the scope is. So it's not fair for me to really say, but you would want modern context statements, you know, they're not history reports anymore. And there's yet to be a National Register bulletin that tells you how to write a context statement. There is, say, for something like an historic structure report, National Register Bulletin 43 lays it all out. So now we have an outline of how to develop these reports. You can always bring it in and show people, and we know what we need to put in the documents. That hasn't been done for historic context statements yet. There's, of course, a National Register framework that tells you what a context is and teaches you how to write a significant statement for any specific building you're studying. But documents to sort of it's a first pass document to figure out if what you're dealing with is significant. And again, significance and integrity, I should say historic, because if we don't have the integrity, we don't have the significance. So there's not a lot of technical stuff, what I call, you know, building fabric stuff, character defining features, and how to know whether they're present or absent in the document now. You know, that is, and for someone that works the document a lot, the 2 of us, that's what's somewhat frustrating. You know, to say there's a theme of economic development over an 80-year period, pretty broad theme. You know, so that means you're going to look at all the building styles from 88 from wherever the time periods were, 1890 to 1965. It would be better to have your style, your thematic approach broken up by specific developmental periods that happen specific to Carmel, not so much any city in California. But remember, our task here is to satisfy the CLG grant and is to get our update, which is a common requirement. You got to update surveys, you got to update context statements. It's a common, that's why it's state funded, you know. So I want to make sure we do that and we satisfy our state grant requirements. And we would like to introduce this thematic approach since our other aspect of what our scope is to flesh out this time period of the 30s to the 80s. So we will throw that thematic approach within that part of our second part of the scope. So now everybody can see it, comment on it, and get an idea if it's as useful as we believe it is in the way most context statements are written now.
Okay. And so, I'm sorry, did I misunderstand you to say that you were actually, within this scope of work, you were actually going to address some of the buildings before 1966, or styles, or? Well,
I part of what the scope
organize it in a way that puts that information.
Well, I think not within the scope we have right now, and then we discussed this previously, in that you are tasking us to understand minimal traditional up to modernism, and now we're expanding up to 86, so up to postmodern.
I mean, if you say organic architecture, you have to go back to the Wright House, which is before this as well. So.
Right. But you're right. There is two branches of our scope which we think we can do during this time period. Is that I would like, you want us to break down this modernism. That is some of what was done previously with the last consultant, which I think some of that can be useful. We have of course our knowledge base and Kent's extensive knowledge base on that. So what we will do in those sections is to come up with photographs of good signature buildings that support this style and what those character defining features are, and then offer integrity charts, or even I'm considering maybe even a global integrity chart. We don't have to break it down for every time period, but when we get into that, we'll have, when we get it written down, we'll be able to get into that more as this project progresses.
And I think in the Pacific Grove context statement, correct me if I'm wrong, they actually have maybe even a separate document about how to use this historic context statement, or how to use it as a tool and interpret it. That's my understanding of that, or I saw that document in Pacific Grove. I'm wondering if that's something, again, whether this is part of
Pacific Grove
immediate scope or later scope, might be interesting to have too.
Yeah, we developed guidelines once we had the historic context statement, complete with drawings of particular, styles of buildings or types of buildings, and then back that up with windows, doors, and chimneys, so that somebody could, and all taken from the city itself, so that if somebody was working with a particular building of a particular style, they would understand what was appropriate to it in terms of things that might be missing.
Mm-hmm.
Or even how you do a phase 2 type of design, right? As we always evaluate, changes to historic buildings, do they meet the Secretary of Interior standards for, in most cases, rehabilitation, right? And those 10 standards rely primarily on what are the character defining features of whatever you're dealing with. And the buildings listed, those features are evident. What are the ones that need to be prioritized so the building maintains historic integrity and can maintain its listing? So this relationship of the physical features of the building, what I say technical, the physical design and historic fabric, historic materials of the building, the presence or absence of that is as critical as whether you have a theme or not, right? We need to know what that style should have, right? And then if it doesn't have it, the building's not listable. I mean, unless, as National Register says, it's such an incredible association that historic integrity is not as critical. But I mean,
I guess that does put in an obligation on your part or our part as we develop this, is to include, obviously, a lot of the styles that are there. I mean, for example, we've talked about this before, this umbrella term modernism really needs to be broken down carefully, because there's a lot of different elements of that are oftentimes very different from each other, right? Different styles, whether it's organic modernism to international style modernism to Third Bay Area regional to Second Bay Area regional, and how that is, and then how do you, like Second Bay Area regional, how do you use that to mid-century, compare that to mid-century modernism?
Yeah, Rifkind and others have done well breaking that down into more specific definitions predicated on roof types, materials, and the like.
But you see what I mean? It's like, unless you have that complete list of styles and each characteristics for those styles, having a building that says, this organic modernism doesn't have cubical form, so maybe it's not like a mid-century modern building, So you know what I'm saying? If you want to actually use characteristics to decide whether it's significant or not, then you got to have a broad breadth of styles defined.
Right, and ideally you would have that for every style within the city. That's what the context statement doesn't have.
Yes.
And I think, frankly, breaking down modernism, there's, you being an architect yourself, there's a lot of, how should we say, dispute or argument about what character defining feature goes with a specific style of modernism. And I think when you consider one-offs, it's even a bigger challenge. So, you're not going to get every character defining feature of every style, here. Or as Catherine Wallace said earlier, it's not every building in the city. It's the broad trends and patterns. It's why you got to be careful about one-offs, because a one-off, creating a theme of one-off designers could be anything, right? How do we make that theme more narrowly defined so you can support it with the buildings themselves, right? So I think the modernism breakdown as a test for this approach is a good one. There may be a lot of back and forth from folks like yourself about maybe that doesn't character define the style. I think this should be added, and that's why we're all having the discussion. But that's what you would arguably like to see, yeah, for every style.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to remember, again, Carmel is a fairly interesting community in its uniqueness and its independence. always. And some of the stuff that's been done here is pretty amazing and doesn't have a style, but it addresses the ordinances and how they write up. Monterey has a building that goes straight up 3 floors because there's a 25-foot limit, but instead of spreading it, the architect realized that the code said you could go up. And so he created it that way. There's experimental stuff here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we talked about that in our previous subcommittee meeting about how there, in idiosyncratic whimsical architecture, one-offs aren't necessarily a style, but there is a pattern of these throughout the different styles that happened over the history of the town. I mean, we talked about this, you can describe the storybook in that way from Comstock. You can describe pieces like the door house, the bark house, these really kind of really idiosyncratic, whimsical buildings that are happening. And I was just looking at one from our former member, Thomas Hood today, who was building this house around this tree. I went by the building site, and it's totally unique. And the form of the building is all based on trying to build around this beautiful oak tree. And of course, that's one of the important things of having an urban forest and letting the architecture almost become subordinate to it. And it creates the form of the building comes out of that subordination to the tree. I mean, maybe that will be on the. Yeah,
you got to remember, by code, it is, because they wouldn't cut the tree down.
No, I get it. Well, yeah, but I'm just saying
on the ground
that may be on, maybe in
existed.
50 years that will be on the inventory too. But that I'm just describing it as something that still continues to this day as something that's unique to Carmel in a way.
Yeah, I guess I just think that specific example is a really tough one to put into a framework of an historic context statement. That's why I think it's critical to establish, especially with modernism, because, I've been studying modernism a long time. Sometimes I don't know if I understand all these variations, and there is so much to when you read a lot of context statements now, modernism is I work with the Pebble Beach one a lot. Modernism is not very well addressed, right? Because everyone thinks Pebble Beach should just be Spanish Revival. I still think we should stick to, we don't want to create our own terminology for modernism. We want to stick to what's basically been defined and accepted, and the one-offs may not fit into that, and I think that in certain cases, you would just use the same approach. Is if that's a one-off and it doesn't fit every category, say it was built in 84 or something, and someone comes up to list it in a few years, right? 10 years or something. It would be more important to you still use the same approach. All right, what character defines that building? All right, it's always going to be the construction technology on the building. That won't change, right?
Materials
and the types of windows, right? The technology used, all of that. But the building you're discussing that Thomas did may not be organic. It may not be these other categories. So, you can't expect the context statement to fit every building you have in a place as eccentric as Carmel. And you could also argue there's one-offs everywhere. There's one-offs in San Francisco. There's one-offs and then you could argue in any town or city in California that attracted designers and architects, which would be any nice place to live probably. You could make an argument that this occurs everywhere. So you're trying to, it's harder for Carmel, but you're trying to categorize the built environment as best as you can. And it's difficult to do that in the modern movement. So I think, as Kent mentioned earlier, using Rifkind or using other modernist terminologies that are accepted is important. I don't know if you can catch every eccentric design in something like this. I think it's more the design approach. I mean, one thing I did when I wrote the agricultural context statements for the county was, it was really just a simple one-pager of how do you use a document? Well, in the case of Carmel, you get a building built at a certain time period. So I go to my time period within my themes. I figure out if that theme is appropriate. Okay, so I find the themes appropriate. Let's say it's, theater development in Carmel. Okay, and now I go to the time period the building was constructed. Let's say it's a Mission Revival theater. Does it have the fabric? Does it have the character defining features that should exist on that building? If it doesn't, it's not a listable building. So again, it's integrity related to significance, and that's what most context statements, at least the early ones, don't have or didn't have.
And can I ask another kind of important question? I'm not sure I fully understand how this is done in the context statements, but obviously you list the styles that happened during that period and the character defining elements of each of those styles. How do you, or is there any way to define the quality of those of the building that's done within that style?
That's the workmanship. Remember that we discussed.
That there's craftsmanship. That'd be a good one. That'd be one element, sure.
Yeah, and that's what when we talk about something like minimal traditional style. Okay, most minimal traditional styles come out of the FDA, the FDA housing incentives, housing administration, right? And it was about building houses as cheaply and quickly as possible, especially during the war, right? If anything was even done. And post-war. So workmanship, you could argue, is pretty poor in these buildings, right? And by now, a lot of those materials are deteriorating. So, workmanship, you could argue. I think workmanship needs to be evaluated relative to the style, though. Are we going to list every minimal traditional building? You ever met a homeowner who wants to keep a minimal traditional building, sometimes single clad, with the plumbing on the outside of the building, but it may be all original. It may be have all the integrity.
Well, there's certain qualities to architecture in general, which is, proportion, scale.
And they're all taken into consideration.
But I guess the idea, guys, is to try to eliminate the subjectivity, which is somewhat hard in what we do because our standards are written somewhat loosely, right? The rehabilitation standards, they're pretty broad. How to establish, there's broad things in National Register publications that say, well, depending on what you're listing a building for, integrity may not be important in certain areas, right? If it's a significant association, say for an artist, maybe it's workmanship's less important. The issues I've always had with that as a design professional with so many years is you go in front of a board or there's a dispute or something's going on with someone disputing a listing or trying to remove a listing or something. It's very hard to present a fair argument if we don't have the documentation to set up the argument.
No, I totally agree. My questions are more about, how do we make them less subjective? And so in terms of defining what's of good quality of a certain style and what's not, obviously it can be done through, does it have those character defining elements? But then beyond that, is there any other mechanism within that helps you determine the quality of the building?
That is not subjective. I think that's a really good question. I don't think that is the intent of historic context statements.
Okay, I'm just
tell you the truth is, especially when you're dealing with this one-off kind of design that I know you've been talking a lot about, Eric, since we've known you. And again, how do you defend a good building, right? Like the three architects in a room might have three different opinions of what a good building is. I hope
that's not true, actually, but. I don't think it's as subjective as you may think, but
okay.
But it's kind of hard to put it into a document, I guess is what I mean.
I think we could certainly address it. It's a great question. I think it's something to discuss. I don't have a definitive answer on it.
Yeah, I mean, it may be to some extent impossible, but I'd be curious to see how other context statements try to attempt that. I mean, because obviously you approach a building and that most people can say, oh, that's, it's beautiful in some way or another. And it has the beautiful lines of the building or the elegance of the proportion. And you can see the quality of it no matter what the style. And it's just a harder thing to put down in terms of a classification, which you can measure, I guess is what I mean.
It is.
Could I say something at this point? I like the way you're starting off this discussion, Seth and Kent. I particularly like the idea of how we can relate or connect these themes that we are going to identify and have already been identified to the different property types. And I also feel that that's one of the failings of the current context statement in that we don't really know how to do that too well as far as historic integrity or actually just evaluating a property based on some of the the types. That's it's not well laid out in the context statement. And I have to admit, I've probably been reading the context statement in its various iterations as a historical document, like you're saying that it was sort of written that way, and I sort of read it that way. And not to show my age, but I think I will. I was working with historic preservation when the National Historic Preservation Act was passed by Congress. And when the state of California entered into the picture in about 1968, I was serving on the Historical Resources Commission at that time. And we were really impressed with the fact that Congress had given every state the charge to pass through 10% of its funding grant for the year to local governments for these kinds of purposes. And I think that is not really, it's not really a state grant. It's actually a federal grant passed through automatically to various cities and counties in California. And I think that is the strength of the Certified Local Government Program. And the fact that we're using this particular grant of monies for this purpose is appropriate, and it's very much needed. As Seth pointed out, we have this issue afloat now that is, how do we maintain Carmel's integrity and unique identity? And I liked what Kent said, is that modern architecture starts here in the 20s. If that can somehow be related to the public, that would be one of the best things that this document could do. Because what I see is that we're like all of us, this having to explain not only integrity, but also the issue of themes and places. I think many people get lost in all of this. And to me, we want this document to be usable, not just read as a history, as I've been doing for quite a while. And I'm encouraged that you have this idea in your minds, and that you're going to also stress the mid-century modern for this particular iteration. And also you might put in, tack a model, as you said, onto the architectural development section that can be used in future work on this particular document. So I'm encouraged. I look upon what we're doing as absolutely essential for right now in the way Carmel's political scene is developing. So good going.
Thanks. I think, but how you interpreted the context statement, from speaking for myself, from working with it for a while, is it is a really good historical document on these myriad of factors that shape Carmel, but it does not relate the built environment to that development. And that is the single biggest frustration. And I still want to stress our scope. Our scope at this stage is not to redefine all of that development, which we all seem to agree with in this room that we'd like to do. It's to satisfy our grant, and that is to get this 20-year time period done. If I'd rather take the 30,000 and redevelop the document, it was up to me. I think it would be a heck of a lot more useful, and we can worry about that time period later, but that's not our scope of work. And I just want to be really, really clear about that. But I would like to at least offer a model of how that could be done within this scope of work. So
start at the party.
Yeah, exactly. Just to kind of get that connection going with everybody. And it's not, there's nothing to point the finger at. You know, historic context statements have been, if you ask me, pretty misunderstood for a lot of years until the way they've been written has been more standardized. And that really has only been within the last 10 or so years. Even if you look at the early ones I wrote, I still don't think they're technical enough in how they relate the environment. But, you know, then my scopes were different as well, of course. But if you read, we did the Architectural Resource Evaluation Handbook for Monterey County. Kent was on the county board at the time. We were trying to make that a model for the entire state. Could you go to any farm site and figure out if it had enough integrity, if it had enough going for it to make it a farmstead developed into the themes that we developed? And historic context statements now, it's automatically, that's how we lay them out. You know, we don't want broad themes over long time periods. If you look at Pacific Grove, it's cogent time periods where these developments in arts, history, culture, commercial, institutional happened, and then the styles go into those time periods. So it's kind of a very kind of cut and dry way to do it. And that's more of a recent within the last 10, 15, I mean, I'm getting old, time's flying, but anyway, between the last 10 to 15 years anyway. So I think it's two different discussions. I'm more concerned about getting this 20-year period done, to tell you the truth. I mean, because I want to make sure we meet the deadlines. And of course, developing the architectural development in the modernist period is something the two of us are working on anyway for other reasons. So that's something we want to know anyway, as professionals, as everything else. But we just with the timeline, I'm concerned about sticking to our scope. And you know, I know this is a tangential a little bit, but reviewing the board's comments on some of the previous work, there are things in there, and we could discuss this at a subcommittee level. Requests for things like discussing historic preservation in Carmel and some of these other aspects they really don't go in historic context statements. You know, you need to stick to your themes, your built environment relative to the themes, and whether they convey significance or not. That's really what the document is, and you're working off a good document in that there's a fantastic developmental history. I should say contextual history of the city from all of the major viewpoints. What we don't have, again, is that relationship to the built environment.
Yeah, well, I would just say for the record, I think Carmel and the history of Carmel deserves that full updating and reorganization of the context statement as a whole. I understand that's not the scope up to September. I would just encourage the city staff and this city council and people higher up than us to move forward with that after we get done with this part of it. And then it really becomes then this great tool for staff and HRB and the citizens to really be able to make much more easy determinations about what is important and what's not. So.
Great.
Is there any other, we haven't really heard, is there any questions from any of the other, from staff on the city side, or is there any, or from Kathy? Or back to Catherine?
No, I think I'm encouraged. I think we should go ahead, and this is a good beginning.
And then just to be clear, I think you said when is the outline you're going to have ready at the next meeting, or is it?
Do we have Marty, could you put up a schedule? When would you like an outline of, say, 65 to 85 and bullet points, that kind of thing? Just so we know everybody sees that early enough in the process.
I apologize. I don't have the schedule in front of me right now. I don't know if Catherine, if that's something that you can pull up. I would like to hear
the last slide of the presentation.
Got it. Okay. So I will share my screen. Before I do that, would like to hear from board member Pomeroy if she has any additional comments. And then also it looks like there might be a couple of members of the public in attendance.
I'll definitely open up to public hearing for sure.
Okay.
I think it's an exciting project. I'm anxious to work on it.
So this is our next step slides, our slide on next steps. So any feedback can be submitted via email to myself or to Catherine Wallace. We also have a dedicated webpage where we're going to be posting information. So the public can refer to that as we continue on in the process. Again, we are going to have that second public workshop at the June 20th meeting, followed by a full working draft in July. And with that, would love to hear from anyone in the public that might have any comments or input.
I'll open up the public hearing in a minute, but just to be clear, that I'd love to see the outline before we get a draft. So is that something you think you guys can produce by the June 20th meeting, or the?
I think we have to. Given the timeline, I don't really think there's a choice.
Yeah. Okay, that would be great to see.
Yeah. And again, you know, there was some good work done previously, but to try to to spend the time on all the comments on previous work that wasn't accepted anyway, I don't think it's the best approach. I think we know we have to stick to our format that exists. It's already laid out in the chapters that are appropriate. We got to update all the chapters post the early settlement chapter for the time period, you know. So what we'll do for each of those chapters is sort of maybe the outline is each chapter and what our bullet points are for the update. And then we fill in the blanks in the next month, but it's a tight schedule, you know, and that doesn't even count the architectural development stuff.
Okay. Well, it also can just be, if you have it ready, it sounds like we could put it up on that website at any point, and then we can go from there. So you can give.
Yeah, I'd almost think we want to get that outline done even faster, but let me not overquote and say certainly by that latest time period, we will do that. I would really like to see an outline in 2 weeks, as busy as the two of us are. I don't know, but we're gonna, you know, because it'd be good to know that outline's accepted and there aren't holes, because, you know, only 4 weeks to fill in all the blanks is a challenge as well.
Yeah, so I agree.
The outline needs to be done next. There's no question about it. We've already started one. We've been discussing it before the meeting, so we'll try to sew that up faster, and then we'll relay it to Marnie and Catherine to put it up.
Okay.
So I think our intent was to have another subcommittee meeting before the June 20th workshop, so that we could discuss the outline with the subcommittee before presenting it at the workshop.
Okay.
So do you want to set a date for an outline before the 20th and a workshop date, so we just know that's the date? Maybe it's better.
We know that the next workshop will be on June 20th,
right.
And we can certainly talk offline about the next subcommittee meeting.
Okay, so we'll be in touch in a few days when we figure out
who's on first.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, with that, I do want to get the public's input for whoever's here. So I will go ahead and open up the public hearing. Is anyone wishing to address the board or have questions for Seth and Kent about the historic context statement update?
Hi there, this is Dale Byrne. I have a few things to say.
Great, Dale, go ahead.
So first of all, this is a great project. It sounds like the city has hired fantastic resources to do this job, and we've got a great HRB team, so it's good. We're going to get some good stuff out of it. I think I've reread this document about 3 times now, and it's sort of painful to go through it. There's some inaccuracies in it. No, I'm not going to choose my words. It's poorly written. I think it's sort of come out, but it's not a fun document to read. It's interesting, but I think the points about the architectural nature of buildings not tying into the history is certainly accurate. But there's also a lot of duplication. You know, the thing about the Henry Hill houses, it's just like, you know, they mention people and then they repeat their names again. So we're sort of doing this project backwards. I think we all know that now. Like the whole thing should have been rewritten and then be the next 20 years. But I guess what I'm seeing this is as a learning experience for all of us, because we've got some professionals that are going to show us how it should be done. And I'm looking forward to the final document to get it all done in a couple of years, because it's going to be really something to see with the pictures and clarity. And I agree with what others have said, that this is going to be such a useful document, not just for the HRB, but for a lot of people in town. And, you know, to Carol's point, you know, a lot of this stuff is bubbling up to the surface right now. And it's bubbled up to the surface about 5 times previously. So hopefully this will help with that clarity to have the discussions be factual and accurate, and we can really get something good out of this. So thank you very much, HRB and past consultants, because this is fantastic.
Great, thank you, Dale.
I'm done.
Anyone else wishing to address the board or the consultants or staff on the historic context statement update?
Yeah, I'll chime in real quickly. This is Nancy Toomey.
Okay, Nancy.
I ditto what Dale just said. I have read the document front to back, and it needs some polishing by all means. And I joined late, so I'll go back and listen to the recording of the upfront part. But I'm thrilled with the engagement you have going on, and look forward to seeing it evolve. So thanks so very much for putting your arms around this. Thumbs up.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else wishing to address the board or the consultants or staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Seth or Kent, do you have any more comments you'd like to mention, or did we cover most of it?
It's a matter of dealing with the outline, getting it in shape. As you well know, we did an exhibit not so very long ago at the Cherry Center of Modernism in Carmel. So we're fortunate in having a considerable number of images. We have a lot of things that we can work with. And I'm very comfortable working with Seth on this and using the basic outline of the existing document, and not the most recent version, but the existing document, to do some trimming and come up with a useful tool. It has to be a tool.
Okay, well, I think a lot of us feel, or I feel, you have to leave it up to you to, based on the time frame you have, to get the most done you can within that time frame and get the scope completed. And then I think it's our job as HRB members and staff and the public to encourage the more extensive review of the document and updating the whole thing. But that will be the next step.
Yeah, so just to speak to the member of the public that mentioned that is the inconsistencies, things like this from earlier chapters is not in our scope at this point. I just want to be clear. We need to tackle the scope. But it's critical to us as practitioners in this region and folks who really care about the community and are living here and love living here, that we kind of nuance out this development of modernism. It's going to be a challenge to do both, but we're gonna go for it. See what we can do.
Great. Monty or Catherine, do you have anything to add, or any members of the board? Okay. Then I guess, thank you all. And I'm glad we had this public meeting to introduce people to know what we're doing now and this big undertaking we're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks. Okay, moving on to the director's report.
So I have a couple items to update the board about this afternoon. The first is the Jeffers Cabin, which is located on Monteverde, just south of 4th Avenue. The board did see this property a number of years ago, and just wanted to let you know that the owners, Matthew and Stacy Roy, have engaged Thomas Hood as their architect. And Thomas has applied for a site assessment for the property. Staff had an opportunity in late March to go out and meet Thomas on site to inspect the current condition of the cabin. Unfortunately, earlier this year, the roof underwent a major collapse, and this created some safety concerns for the neighboring properties. And a particular concern is the masonry chimney on the south side of the cabin, which has the potential to damage the neighbor's house should it collapse. So as a result, the director, Brandon Swanson, has approved a shoring and stabilization plan, and this will protect the remaining portions of the historic resource as well as neighboring properties. Once the shoring is in place and the structure is stabilized, The architect will photo document and field measure all aspects of the cabin, and the information will be used to create a 3D model for reconstruction of the cabin. And then at that time, a planning application will be submitted, and it will go through our formal design study process, which includes bringing the project back to the board for consideration. So just wanted to update you on the status of that project, let you know what's going on. The next item, I'm going to make another plug for this year's annual conference with the California Preservation Foundation. It is June 7th through 9th, and it's all virtual. And this is just a great opportunity to get some training and education. And while I've heard from most of you, and I understand you all have very busy schedules, I did want to try and entice you one more time to attend at least a few of the sessions. You do not have to attend the conference in its entirety, but there are some sessions that you may find really interesting. And so I just wanted to mention a few of those this afternoon. And that includes sessions on sustainable building design, rehabilitation, adaptive reuse. There's a session on context statements, as well as climate adaptation and using technology in restoration. So if you are available, I would just ask that you consider attending a portion of the conference. And if that's possible, if you could reach out to me by Wednesday, that would be great, so I can reserve a spot for you. We do have 10 spots available. And if there are certain board members that just cannot attend, we do want to offer those spaces to other city staff members. And then the third update I had for the board is regarding our Design Traditions 1.5 project. So this is our update to the residential and commercial design guidelines. So this effort is well underway at this point. The consultants, the subcommittee, and staff have been very busy preparing public workshops, which are tentatively scheduled for late June. If anyone wants to be added to the email list for the project, you can go to our website, and on the homepage, you can click on the Sign Me Up button. And if you don't see it, you can simply do a search for Sign Me Up. This is a great way to stay up to date, not only on the Design Traditions project, but other topics of interest that really range from local events all the way to adoption of the budget. And those are the updates that I had for the board this afternoon.
Great, Marnie, thank you. Any questions of Marnie about any of that? And I think you did send out an email which gives us a link to all the different classes that are optioned or workshops that are offered during the conference, right? So we'll have to look at that again.
Marnie, would you mind sending that link to us again?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Oops. There's no other questions of Marnie. Future agenda items are next on the list, and we have our next scheduled meeting for June 20th. So with that, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye. Bye.